I wonder where it all started. Back there. It doesn't matter where. Even if all of this was set in stone from the start. Even if all of this was what I wanted. Everything is still ahead.
When Attack on Titan ended, many people were quick to decide that the ending was terrible. Even beyond that, many people accused it of being retconned, that for whatever reason, Isayama had backed out of his vision at the last minute, creating a new ending and scrapping what he had spent a decade planning. At the heart of that discussion was Eren himself. The conclusion of his arc and the reveal of his motivations led many people to believe his character had been inexplicably ruined right at the end. For a time, I myself was one of the people who believed that. I hated the ending and I hated what I felt like it had done to Eren. But as the months passed and as I continued to discuss the ending with more and more people, I began to come to a realization. Not only is the belief that the ending was retconned entirely incorrect, but the ending we got was the only logical conclusion the story could have had. More specifically, and what I'm going to be focusing on in this video, is that Eren's conclusion was not only logical and natural, but also fantastic, inventive writing that truly elevated his character to a level very few could have foreseen. No matter how you feel about the ending or Eren's conclusion, for the next hour and a half I'd like to ask you to forget everything you think you know about the series. Understanding Eren takes not only a deep dive of the entire story, but also an open mind and a willingness to reconsider your preconceptions and past expectations. If you can do that, I think you'll find that Eren's arc is a fascinating piece of character writing grounded in philosophy, with a lot to say about the meaning of freedom. My intention with this video is to definitively close the book on the controversies and the many misunderstandings that have prevailed in the discourse surrounding Eren. This video is also designed to be timeless, able to be watched no matter whether you're watching this after the anime is concluded or if it's still ongoing. Once again, remember to keep an open mind as you join me on this exhaustive look at almost every aspect of Eren's characterization, as I try to uncover the meaning of what Isayama truly wanted to say with his writing. And remember, while these are the conclusions I've reached, you're free to disagree, and I encourage you to comment any differing interpretations you have after watching. Before anything else, we need to be on the same page about Eren's arc spanning the first 2/3 of the story. Eren's character is impossible to understand unless you have a full comprehension of his motivations and character growth prior to the time skip. While you may feel like you already have a solid understanding of this, there's a good chance that you've missed crucial aspects of his character that will drastically impact your understanding later on. I would highly recommend not skipping through any of this, no matter how well you feel like you already understand it. With that out of the way, let's begin. Attack on Titan began as a very simple story, and Eren's characterization matched that simplicity. In the beginning, his single goal was to wipe out the Titans, the monsters that had stolen humanity's freedom. But Eren didn't question what the Titans were, or why they did what they did. Eren fought them because he knew that once the Titans were gone, humanity would have its freedom back. With this baseline characterization established, every new development of the story began to test his single-minded understanding little by little. While he had thought their enemies were simple monsters, it became clear that there was something more behind the Titans when it was revealed that he himself had the power to become one of them. Later he learned that his own friends were the ones who had destroyed the walls. Soon after, it was revealed that every single one of the mindless Titans was a human trapped against their will. And by the Uprising arc, it was clear that the greatest threat to humanity was itself. Every one of these developments raised more questions about the nature of their conflict. Who were they actually fighting against? Eren began to ask himself that question, and that question would be answered upon reaching the basement. In the basement were books that contained the truth of their world that had been kept hidden. This discovery would flip Eren's perception of the world on its head, forcing him to confront his own worldview, drastically altering the direction of his character arc from that point on. To understand why it affected him to such an extreme, and before we can talk about the basement, we also need to understand Eren's twisted concept of freedom and what exactly being free meant to him. Growing up, Eren was a normal kid who didn't question the world around him, and he accepted things as they were. He didn't have the characteristic drive for freedom that we know him for. However, he was exceptionally bored with the uneventful world in front of him. Despite that, he had no aspirations to go outside the walls, nor to join the Scouts. What we need to uncover then is when and why Eren's transfixion on freedom began. Eren's desire for freedom is an inherent part of him, but it's something that wasn't awakened until the day he realized that he wasn't free. That realization occurred when Armin showed him a book about the outside world, and he learned about Armin's dream of exploring it.
あの時、お前の話を聞いてお前の目を見るまでは、お前は楽しそうに夢を見てるのに、俺には何もなかった。そこで初めて知ったんだ。俺は不自由なんだって。
Eren was entranced as he listened to Armin speak about his dream, but he didn't understand what exactly Armin was captivated by. Armin's dream was simple. He wanted to explore the outside world. The things in the book looked amazing to him, and he was driven by a sense of wonder at what could be out there. Eren did not have the same sense of wonder. What Eren saw in the book, and how he interpreted it, was fundamentally different. Instead of feeling curiosity, for Eren, the book only showed him his own lack of freedom. Instead of seeing wondrous landscapes filled with mystery, Eren only saw the vast empty earth that had been taken from them. He felt no wonder nor curiosity at the prospect of seeing it. He only wanted the freedom that taking it back would give him. Later, Eren thought more about what he had learned, and his hatred began to grow. Eren had learned from the book what had been taken from them, and that he was not free. By extension, Eren decided, it must mean that someone who was able to see the things that had been taken away from them was free. For Eren, freedom was something inherent that everyone had at the moment of birth and could only be taken away by outside factors. Eren sought freedom because he was born with it and it had been taken away from him. That would become the motivation for Eren's actions going forward. His overwhelming will to fight would be driven by the desire to see the empty, free world that lay beyond the walls. In fact, Eren's desire for freedom can be summed up as the desire to see what was depicted in Armin's book. Because for Eren, freedom itself is what was depicted in the book, and he would not be free until he had seen it for himself. In a sense, Eren's drive for freedom was a corruption of Armin's childlike wonder. For each of them, freedom meant something vastly different. For Armin, it represented curiosity, wonder, and hope, the main values of the Survey Corps. But for Eren, freedom was something inherent that had been stolen from him, and his lack of it brought him outrage towards their world. And this differing understanding of what they were fighting for would inevitably lead to conflict between the two of them, pitting Eren against the Survey Corps and what they fought for.
地下室にあったものは何だ？希望だったのか？それとも絶望か？
After reaching the basement, the truth of the outside world was finally revealed. In the ideal scenario Eren had constructed in his mind, this would be the end of his journey and the point at which he would finally be free. Outside of the walls lies the world depicted in Armin's book. After defeating the Titans, humanity would retake their territory and finally be free. That's the happy ending that Eren had envisioned for himself and for his friends. But Attack on Titan is not that kind of story. There was no such promised scenery outside of the walls. What was actually out there was a world much, much worse than anyone in the walls could have imagined. It was a world controlled by the same enemies who sent the Titans to slaughter them. A world in which they were thought of as monsters who needed to be wiped out. In a world in which children were fed alive to dogs.
俺たちはまだ何も知らないんだよ。炎の水も、氷の大地も、砂の雪原も。きっと壁の外には自由が。
At that moment, the truth set in. The freedom he had seen depicted in Armin's book had always been an idyllic fantasy that never existed. There had never been freedom past the walls. Eren's journey until now had been one in which his view of the world had been constantly tested. And in the near future, he would come to understand that the people he thought of as his enemies were no different from himself. In other words, Eren's journey had been one of gaining understanding and empathy. However, Eren's pursuit of freedom was antithetical to the very understanding he had spent so long developing. Eren's very idea of freedom was based on the assumption that their conflict was a simple one, in which defeating the Titans was enough to achieve freedom. Eren had gained empathy, but he was still someone who inherently valued freedom above almost all else. And the freedom he sought did not exist in a complicated world like theirs. And with that contradiction, a dilemma had formed in Eren's mind. Eren's attempt to reconcile the difference between his ideal freedom and the reality of the world would become the new driving force of his actions.
向こうにいる敵全部殺せば俺たち自由になれるのか?
Knowing fully what freedom meant to Eren, we can now grasp exactly what he was asking with this question. Eren was not asking when the fighting would be over, but rather if the freedom he sought could be obtained if the outside world was wiped clean. At that moment, Armin, in awe at the sight of the ocean, saw Eren's expression. He didn't want to admit it, but he understood. He and Eren did not share the same dream. Experiencing this simple moment was enough for Armin, but Eren wanted something more. And that desire from Eren brings us to the main topic of this video. Eren could not accept that the world outside of the walls was different from the free world he had imagined. And because of that discrepancy, Eren used the rumbling to destroy the world, not out of necessity, but because it was what he wanted to do. This revelation can be hard to believe at first, or even seem like an outright retcon. When you explore deep into Eren's character, however, you begin to realize that this is the only place Eren's story could have gone from the very beginning, and how this desire was the only logical endpoint of his obsessive desire for freedom. Whether or not you like this part of the story is ultimately subjective, but I believe that this is an incredibly well-written, fascinating, and unique character motivation that deserves to be acknowledged for what it is. While it could not be immediately appreciated by most after finishing the story for the first time, I believe that this is one of the greatest aspects of AOT and elevated Eren to a truly timeless character. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I feel the need to say this now. I am not saying that the only reason Eren did what he did was because it was what he wanted, but I am arguing that it was his primary motivation. Like all complex characters, Eren has several layers of reasoning behind all of his actions, and I'm not going to ignore the rest of his characterization. We'll get to the rest as the video progresses. After understanding the true meaning of Eren's desire for freedom, many events of the story retroactively make more sense and are recontextualized. I want to start by going over one of the most important of these moments, as well as one of the most important character dynamics in the series. So let's talk about the relationship between Eren and Reiner. Many have said this before, but Eren and Reiner are truly two sides of the same coin, and understanding the actions of one will help us understand the actions of the other. To start, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about Reiner, and his motivation for doing what he did. Reiner was born in the Liberio internment zone from an Eldian mother and a Marleyan father. Growing up, his mother promised him that becoming an honorary Marleyan would let the two of them live with his estranged father. The status of honorary Marleyan was awarded to any warrior and their family, granting them permission to live outside of the internment zone. Honorary Marleyans were the exception to Eldian oppression. It was the one way for an Eldian to gain the acceptance and respect of Marley. With that in mind, Reiner devoted himself to becoming a warrior. If only he could become Marley's hero, he thought, then surely he would gain the approval of his father. Going to him before the mission began, he realized that the acceptance he thought he would gain with his new role couldn't be found with his father. The notion that his dad would love him just because he was an honorary Marleyan now had been naive. But, he told himself, even if his father didn't love him, he could still become a hero to the entire world and gain acceptance that way, even if it wasn't with his father. He led the mission to destroy Wall Maria with that in mind. His devotion to his dream only increased from that point. He convinced himself that his new friends were the evil people that Marley had told him they would be. But as time passed, he knew more and more that it wasn't true, and that the propaganda had all been a lie. He loved his new friends, and with them he even found acceptance. But even despite that, it was Reiner who made the decision to kill Marco in cold blood, and it was he who led the mission to destroy Wall Rose. His dream of becoming a respected hero of the world outweighed everything else, even leading him to cast aside what was right in front of him. And so Reiner betrayed his morals to seek what he wanted. But even still, after casting everything aside, Reiner could not obtain what he sought. In the end, after being rejected by the world, he had nothing left, and nothing to live for. 4 years after the warriors' defeat, Eren began living in Marley. Having no basis on which to judge the people of the outside world aside from Grisha's memories, he still saw them as his enemies. But as he lived alongside them, he discovered the same truth that Reiner had once learned. The people of Marley were no different than the people inside of the walls. Eren realized that Reiner had once lived with the enemy as he was doing now, and he began to think about how Reiner must have felt doing so. He recalled the moment that Reiner betrayed him, and what Reiner had said.
こんな奴らがいるなんて知らずにいれば、俺はこんな半端なクソ野郎にならずに済んだのに。
He thought back to Reiner's contradictory behavior of putting his life at risk for the people who he was there to kill. He remembered the compassion that Reiner had shown to everyone, despite having been supposedly brainwashed from birth. Eren thought that Reiner must have come to the same conclusion that he had. There are no devils, only people. Everyone in the walls, and in Marley, is fundamentally the same. Only that would explain his contradictory behavior. Reiner was no longer under the influence of Marley's propaganda. But if Reiner had come to that understanding, then why had he still made the choice to destroy Wall Rose? He had no proof, but he had a suspicion he knew exactly why Reiner had chosen to destroy the wall, and if he was right, it meant that he and Reiner were exactly alike. Eren's assumption was that Reiner knew it was wrong to kill the people of the walls, but still did it anyways, not because of propaganda, but because it was what he wanted. With that in mind, he confronted Reiner to hear the truth for himself. The conversation that followed can only be fully understood with the context I've laid out for you, so we'll be going through it line by line. Keep in mind that I have to cut up this scene to be able to show it, so please bear with the choppiness.
エレン、どうやって何しにここに来た？
お前と同じだよ。
Eren referred to what Reiner said on the day the two of them met. It's important to understand that Eren confronted Reiner with the assumption that he was correct about Reiner's motivation. With hindsight, we know that when Reiner said, to save the world, what he actually meant was that he was there for his own dream, while using to save the world as a justification. Eren had already come to this realization about Reiner's actions. We can infer then that when Eren said, the same thing as you, he was not saying he had a plan for saving the world. Rather, Eren was saying he was going to do the same thing Reiner did, and while using the same excuse that Reiner had. Eren knew that if he was right about Reiner's motivation, then Reiner would correctly interpret this statement as a threat that Eren was there to kill them. Reiner did interpret it as a threat, but not for the right reason. Because Reiner was under the presumption that Eren was here to carry out the promise he had made 4 years ago.
俺は頑張るしかねえ。お前らができるだけ苦しんで死ぬように。
What Reiner had yet to realize was that Eren no longer viewed him as an enemy that needed to be killed. Eren now understood him perfectly. And because Reiner had yet to make that connection, he had yet to understand the nature of Eren's threat. Terrified by what he perceived as Eren's bloodthirsty desire for revenge, Reiner struggled to respond.
わからないが、お前と同じだよ。仕方なかったってやつだ。
This was his second hint, and his second attempt to make Reiner understand exactly what he intended on doing. But Eren was right. Reiner didn't get it. They listened to Willie's speech for a while. Eventually, Eren spoke again, after Willie revealed the purpose of the Parody Island operation and the threat of the Wall Titans.
聞いたか、ライナー。あれが壁を破壊した理由だろ。お前たちは世界を救おうとした。そうなんだろ。
Eren now switched into weaponizing Reiner's guilt. He gave Reiner an easy out, that his actions were the result of propaganda. But that was too easy of an excuse, to the point it must have been humiliating for Reiner, who'd spent the last 4 years in regret over the choices he had made.
あの日、壁が破られ、俺の故郷は巨人に蹂躙され、目の前で母親が食われた。俺には分からなかった。なぜだ、ライナー。なんで母さんはあの日、巨人に食われた？
Eren, of course, knew the answer to this question already. The goal of the question was to increase the pressure further. But Reiner again didn't understand that, and interpreted it as a genuine question from someone who he perceived as not understanding the world.
それは俺たちがあの日壁を破壊したからだ。
なぜ壁を破壊した？
混乱に乗じて壁内に侵入し、壁の方の出方を伺うた。
その任務とは？
思想奪還し、世界を救うことだ。
Reiner reluctantly once again lied about his reasoning. This time Eren replied by outright mocking Reiner's canned response.
そうか、世界を救うためだったら、それは仕方ないよな。
Reiner could not take the pressure any longer. He knew Eren must be here to kill him. Having enough of the mind games, Reiner wanted a direct answer.
あの時言ってたよな。お前らができるだけ苦しんで死ぬように努力するって。そのために来たんだろう。
But Eren's response was not anything like Reiner expected.
ああ、言ったっけ、そんなこと。忘れてくれ。海の向こう側にあるものすべてが敵に見えた。そして今、海を渡って敵と同じ屋根の下で敵と同じ飯を食った。
Referring to how Reiner once did the same and learned the same lesson, he said,
ライナー、お前と同じだよ。もちろんムカつくやつもいるし、いいやつもいる。海の外も壁の中も同じなんだ。
At that moment, Reiner finally realized that Eren now understood his enemies. He's the same as me, Reiner thought. But Reiner had yet to take the next logical step in that line of reasoning, that Eren was going to do the same as him and kill his enemies despite what he had learned. Eren now moved on to pressure Reiner for the final time. He knew that if he was right, Reiner's guilt, especially after realizing Eren alone could understand his suffering, would be too great for him not to refute what Eren was about to say.
だがお前たちは壁の中にいる奴らは悪魔だと教えられた。まだ何も知らない子供がそう叩き込まれた。子供だったお前に。なあライナー、お前ずっと苦しかっただろ。
Under the pressure and the guilt of being pardoned for actions that were of his own choice, Reiner finally gave in.
違うんだエレン。俺はあの日マルセルが食われて兄とベルトルトは作戦を中止して、俺は英雄になりたかった。誰かに尊敬されたかった。俺が悪いんだよ。お前の母親が巨人に食われたのは俺のせいだ。
Reiner desperately wanted to be judged for his crimes, for the guilt that was eating away at him every day. And Eren, who had come to understand him, could be the one to end his suffering. This was the confession that Eren had been waiting for. Eren realized then that everything was exactly as he had assumed.
やっぱり俺はお前と同じだ。
Just as Eren had suspected, Reiner knew perfectly well that the people of the walls didn't deserve to die, but he chose to kill them anyway out of his own volition. Not because Reiner was brainwashed or believed it was the right thing to do, but because it was what he wanted for himself. And with that, we can now understand the true meaning of this line. Reiner was not saying that he regretted his actions after realizing they were good people. What Reiner actually meant in that moment was that he wished he had not come to understand the people of the walls, as he could no longer kill them with a clear conscience. But what Eren would say next would change everything.
多分生まれた時からこうなんだ。俺は進み続ける。
Reiner was taken aback. He had expected to be judged, but Eren said something he didn't anticipate. After Reiner himself confessed his reasons for the horrible things he had done, Eren responded by saying, "I'm the same as you." And it was likely at that moment that Reiner realized Eren was not here to absolve him of his sins.
敵を駆逐するまで。
Eren, now satisfied that he understood Reiner and having someone to share his own sin with, began his attack that would lead to the destruction of the world. But it would still be some time before Reiner would understand Eren and the full meaning of the conversation that they shared underneath the stage.
I am just me. I always have been. If someone tries to steal my freedom away, I won't hesitate to take theirs. Our father didn't make me that way. I've been like this since birth.
Why is Eren the way that he is? Why does he want to be free, and where did that desire come from? Answering those questions is the key to understanding the point of Eren's character. And to answer them, we have to discuss the concepts of dreams, free will, and inherent nature.
俺たちはあの父親の被害者。お前は父親に洗脳されている。
Those were Zeke's first words to Eren after finally meeting him. Grisha had been raised by Zeke to be an Eldian restorationist, and he assumed that their father had done the same thing to Eren. But as they explored Grisha's life together in paths, it became clear that Grisha had raised Eren as a normal child. As someone whose entire life and ideology had been shaped by others, Zeke didn't understand how it was possible for Eren to be the way he was without any outside influence. Zeke never understood, but the reason for this was because Eren was someone who was a slave to his own nature. But what does that mean? To begin to understand that question, let's first look at an interview Isayama did in 2017. In the interview, he talked about some of his inspirations for AOT. One of these was a manga called Himeanole. I'd like to share an excerpt from this interview in which Isayama talked about his thoughts on the series. When I read Himeanole, I knew society would consider the serial killer in the story unforgivable under social norms. But when I took into account his life and background, I still wondered, if this was his nature, then who's to blame? I even thought, is it merely a coincidence that I wasn't born as a murderer? We justify what we absolutely cannot accomplish as a flaw due to lack of effort, and there is bitterness within that. On the other hand, for a perpetrator, having the mindset of, it's not because I lack effort that I became like this, is a form of solace. In other words, the way we're born is out of our control. Is it a murderer's fault if it's in their nature to murder? If not, then who's to blame? Is it just a coincidence that you and I were not born as someone with the inherent desire to kill? This question is at the center of the moral dilemma being explored with Eren's inherent nature. Eren was born with the dream of being free, and as a consequence, was born with the desire to destroy the unfree world. If it was in Eren's nature to destroy the world, is he still to blame? Looking at it from that perspective, one can argue that Eren was never free to begin with. Eren was a slave to his own nature in the dream of freedom it created, and in the end he could do nothing to stop it. To really understand the point of all this, we have to dive deep into some philosophy. So I'd like to ask the question, why do any of us act the way that we do? I think most people's first answer would be that our actions and behavior are a result of the life experiences we've had that have shaped our personality and opinions. Others will say that the way we act is due to our own nature, that some people are born good or evil. Others still will say it's a combination of the two. Regardless of where their personality came from, most people act within their own morals and beliefs. Does that mean none of us have the freedom to act outside of those values? If we can't act outside of those values, does that mean all of us lack true free will? By extension then, does that mean that we shouldn't hold ourselves at fault for our own character flaws? Personally, I think it's ridiculous to say that we can't be held accountable for our own actions, just because of the parts of our personalities that are out of our control. I think most people would agree. Isayama certainly isn't saying that Eren is free of the consequences of his actions either. But I think at the very least, this is an interesting question to think about, and we'll talk about it more later in the video. One very, very important thing to make clear is that while Eren's characterization is an exploration of inherent nature, the extent to which every character is controlled by their own nature is not the same. Zeke in particular is one character whose identity, goals, and dream were shaped by the actions of others, which is exactly why Eren, who'd been completely free of ideological influence, was someone who Zeke could never understand. Together, the two brothers were an exploration of nature versus nurture. I'm saying this because, again, it's important to understand that not every character in the story is a commentary on inherent nature. Eren is a unique case of someone whose ideology and dream were formed by his own uninfluenced nature the moment he was born. Zeke is the opposite. But other than those two, the vast majority of the characters aren't used as an exploration of this topic. Eren is a very unique character in how his inherent nature is explored, and how it affects the story. What is brought up and explored with many characters in the story, however, is the concept of the dream. While Eren's dream was a result of his own inherent nature, that is not true in every case. Which brings us to Kenny Ackerman, whose life and death embody this concept. Understanding Kenny is necessary to understanding the final message of the story. Unlike Eren, Kenny's character was not an exploration of inherent nature. Whether Kenny's personality was a result of his own inherent nature, or his learned behavior, is irrelevant. What Kenny is relevant to the ending, rather, has to do with his dream, and the conclusion he reached about it just before his death. When the final chapter came out, the chapter in which Kenny's life was explored was republished alongside it. That wasn't a coincidence. This chapter is one of the most important of the entire series, and without it the message of the story wouldn't be complete. Kenny was once a mass murderer bent on revenge for the persecution of his family. He lived a life of misery and self-hatred, but even still the one thing he prided himself on was being the strongest around. But one day Kenny met Yuri Race, the king of the walls at the time. Yuri easily stopped Kenny's attack, grabbing him in his tightened hand. Kenny prepared for death and begged for mercy, having finally met someone his power couldn't defeat. However, something unexpected happened. Yuri released him and begged for Kenny's forgiveness for what the royal family had done to the Ackermans. This encounter awakened a new dream in Kenny. Yuri, who had all the power in the world, was bowing to a man who'd been reduced to powerlessness before him. But why? Kenny decided that Yuri's godlike, unstoppable power gave him the luxury to be kind, even towards murderous scum like himself. Kenny, who was full of self-hatred but lacking the means to better himself, then decided, if I can become as powerful as Yuri, I can become kind as well. Kenny would spend the next 20 years in pursuit of his dream, ironically becoming a much crueler person and growing further and further from the kindness he sought. After Rod's transformation in the chapel, Kenny was gravely wounded. Bleeding out, he encountered his nephew Levi. In his hands, he had a Titan injection that he'd stolen from Rod. He realized that he could save his own life, at the cost of being turned into a real monster. But in his dying moments, Kenny began reflecting on his life. Kenny had never understood Yuri's kindness, but he finally realized why Yuri had acted the way that he did.
みんな何かに酔っ払ってねえとやってられなかったんだな。みんな何かの奴隷だった。
They had all been a slave to a dream that gave them the strength to keep pushing on. But every time, those dreams had consumed those that dreamed them. Kenny realized that if he were to use this injection on himself, he would also be consumed by his own dream, having never achieved the kindness that he wanted. And in his last moments, Kenny let go of his dream, handing the injection to Levi in his first act of genuine selflessness. And with that action, Kenny finally found peace. It was only through letting go of his dream that Kenny was able to avoid the self-destruction of those who had come before him. And only by letting go of his dream was he able to achieve the kindness that he wanted. Kenny lived his life controlled by his own dream. He was a violent person, but he was someone whose dream was to defy that violence. What makes Kenny especially interesting is that at the end of his life he was able to overcome his own dream. It may be correct to say that in that way, Kenny gained true freedom. In contrast, Eren was someone who lived his entire life controlled by his dream. And ultimately, Eren would not have the strength to let go of his dream and was consumed by it. We'll come back to talk more about that later, but for now, there's one more aspect of Eren's nature that we need to talk about. Attack on Schoolcast is an alternate universe joke manga created by Isayama. 2 panels from Schoolcast were released at the back of every new volume for the last several years of AOT's run, and as time passed, the panels began to tell a coherent story. There's a lot to analyze from Schoolcast, but for the sake of what I'm talking about, we only need to focus on the Schoolcast version of Eren. Isayama has said before that Schoolcasts would be relevant to understanding the main story, and I believe that this is what he was talking about. In the Schoolcast universe, we see a different version of Eren. He's still the same character, but he lives in a world where he isn't restricted by walls and has never had to fight for freedom. This version of Eren was already free, and by analyzing him in that context, we can get a better understanding of his nature. In this world without freedom to fight for, Eren was profoundly bored. Just like the Eren of the main universe before he discovered his own lack of freedom, this Eren longed for something interesting to happen. One night, Eren had a dream where a zombie apocalypse began. Without realizing it was a dream, his personality immediately switched to the pre-time skip Eren that we knew. The zombies, of course, were meant as a representation of the Titans from before we learned anything about them. This dream is of a world where Eren is most at peace, fighting for freedom in a simple world with clear good guys and bad guys, with no moral dilemma in fighting his enemies. After waking up from the dream and finding out that none of it was real, he realized that he'd returned to his boring life. He started to cry, saying he couldn't take any more of a life like this. But later, as Eren reflected on his dream, his inherent nature began to come through.
Ever since I had that dream about the zombies, I haven't been able to stand this boring life where nothing happens. Of course humanity isn't in danger of being annihilated. It's impossible. A dream that ridiculous would never... No, wait. If the danger doesn't exist, then I could just cause it myself. A threat to all of humanity.
Let's summarize exactly what the implications of this are. No matter the place, as long as he wasn't free and realized that fact, Eren would always long for freedom. Without the need to long for freedom, he would be immeasurably bored with the world. In his boredom, he would long for a world without freedom, just so that he could fight for it. Eren would go as far as wanting to destroy a free world, just to create one where he had an excuse to fight for freedom. This is one of the most critical aspects of his character that you must understand. This was Eren's nature, no matter the circumstances, and it could not be changed. It had been a part of him since the moment he was born. School cast was the last piece of the puzzle that we needed. Eren had always been like this. It was not Eren who changed, but it was us, and how we perceived him. After his attack on Marley, Eren seemed to have changed into a cold-blooded killer. But that wasn't true. Eren had always been this way. Because his character growth conflicted with his inherent nature, Eren remained fundamentally the same character from the first chapter until the very last one. While Eren did grow as a person throughout his journey, in the end he rejected that growth, choosing to remain literally as the same child he was at the beginning. So where was this Eren, the one capable of murdering billions of people, all of this time? In truth, he'd always been there. What changed was our perspective. In the Marley arc, we were introduced to an entirely new cast of protagonists on the opposite side of the conflict. And now with their perspective, we were able to see Eren's inhuman drive for freedom as the terrifying reality that it was. His friends didn't want to notice, just as those of us reading and watching didn't want to either, because we viewed Eren as being on our side. But Eren's drive for freedom is not admirable. It's terrifying, merciless, and without empathy. Because Eren was on our side, we couldn't see just how unnatural and ruthless his actions were. When you look at Eren from the other side, as the enemy, the true nature of his actions becomes apparent. Eren was someone who would stop at almost nothing to preserve the immature, selfish dream that had awakened the day he learned about Armin's book. Even though he'd come to understand that everyone was the same, Eren continued onward in pursuit of that dream. And it's at that point that Eren's role as the protagonist of the series switched to that of antagonist. He would continue to kill and destroy for his own sake, despite knowing it was the wrong thing to do. Eren had become a character who opposed the message of the story, representing the opposite of everything we had learned up to that point. All of Eren's actions would culminate in the rumbling and the destruction of the world. The rumbling was the end point of Eren's irrational ideology, and the point at which his own friends could no longer overlook his nature. It's also the point at which the ideology of Eren, who'd rejected the themes of the story, would clash with Armin, who now embodied the themes of the story. But before we talk about the rumbling, we need to talk about Eren's future memories and how exactly time manipulation works in AOT. Before anything else, you have to understand that in AOT there is only one timeline, and it is the one that we see. There are no alternate or split timelines. When we talk about Eren in the future, we're talking about the one and only future that is a result of the actions taken in the past. Changing the past does not create a split in the timeline. The reason we know this is true should become self-evident as we talk more about it. It's the only way that what we're presented with makes logical sense. Whether or not all of this means that the future can't be changed is another topic we'll discuss later. With that out of the way, let's talk about Eren's future memories. When he kissed Historia's hand at the medal ceremony, Eren saw his own future. However, the way that this happened, and what Eren learned from this event, are almost universally misunderstood. The widespread confusion regarding this moment has had massive ramifications on the discourse surrounding Eren and the ending as a whole. These misconceptions have even led some people to hate Eren's character, when they otherwise wouldn't. If you take nothing else away from this video, I want you to take this from it. Because misunderstandings about Eren's future memories have led many people to believe that Eren is an entirely different character than he actually is. If you don't understand exactly what he knew and what he didn't, his actions appear contradictory and illogical. The first important thing to understand is that when he kissed Historia's hand, Eren did not receive memories from his future self. He simply unlocked the last of Grisha's memories that he had yet to see. He had seen his dad's memories twice before, first in the race cave, and again after learning the secret of the basement. Why would seeing Grisha's memories allow Eren to know the future? That's because Grisha had memories of the future that he had received from Eren. Future Eren had sent them to Grisha using the power of the Attack Titan. So when he kissed Historia's hand, Eren witnessed the memories of his own future that Grisha had been sent. Keeping that in mind, it's more appropriate to say that at the medal ceremony, Eren did not see the future, he actually saw the past. To summarize, Eren did not look forward into his own future, but rather looked backwards into Grisha's past. But because Grisha had seen Eren's future, witnessing Grisha's memories allowed Eren to see the future that Grisha had seen. The distinction that Eren saw the past rather than the future is incredibly important. It tells us exactly what Eren did and did not know about the future, and is necessary for understanding Eren's goals. Because Eren had seen Grisha's memories, it meant that Eren was limited to only knowing things that were within Grisha's memories. In other words, all of the things that Eren learned from this were things that Grisha knew as well. This distinction also tells us something very important about the nature of the Attack Titan's ability. While it was described by Grisha as the ability to see into the future, that is not quite right. Rather, its ability is to allow one to send their own memories to the Attack Titan's past inheritors. This means that Eren could not look into his own future at will, nor could his future self send his past self memories. However, there is a workaround to this limitation. Eren was able to send Grisha, the previous Attack Titan, his own memories. By interacting with royal blood, Eren was then able to view the memories that had been sent to Grisha from himself in the future. In that roundabout way, Eren was able to see his own future. We know that this is the limitation of the Attack Titan's ability, because if the limitation didn't exist, there would be no reason to go through Grisha and no need to show him future events that he would be opposed to. If it were possible, it would be much easier for Eren to simply send his past self memories directly. We also know that Grisha was ignorant regarding certain future events. As he could not look into the future at will, his future memories did not contain everything. The memories that he'd been sent had been picked and chosen deliberately. So taking all of that into account, what memories did Grisha receive from Eren in the future? He received Eren's memories of activating the rumbling and reaching the scenery that Eren described as freedom. He received Eren's memories of Eren and Zeke exploring his own memories and paths, including memories of Eren telling him to eat the Founder. He received other miscellaneous future memories from Eren, such as meeting Ramsay. When Eren kissed Historia's hand, these are the memories that he recalled from Grisha. Grisha did not receive any memories from Eren beyond the scenery of freedom. That also means that Eren did not learn at this time anything beyond reaching that scenery either. But if that's true, then doesn't it mean that Eren had no idea he would be stopped in the end? And the answer to that question is yes. Eren did not know he would be stopped when he began the rumbling. The magnitude of the consequences of this misunderstanding really cannot be overstated. The belief that Eren planned for the rumbling to be stopped from the beginning is absolutely incorrect and stems entirely from misunderstanding how the future memories work. While completely untrue, this has become one of the most controversial parts of the ending. It has led people to believe that Eren spent the entire time skip putting on an act and that his entire characterization was a lie. In reality, that is not even remotely true. To say it again, when he began the rumbling, Eren did not yet know that his friends would ultimately stop him, or that the Titan curse would be ended as a result. To many of you watching, that might sound ridiculous. The belief that Eren knew he would be stopped the entire time is so widely accepted that at first, it seems impossible that he didn't. I myself didn't realize this for a long time, and I'm sure that some of you are still not convinced. However, by examining Grisha's dialogue, we can determine exactly what he knew, and in turn what Eren knew. Remember that because of how Eren received the future memories, Eren only knew what Grisha knew. After killing the Race family, Grisha stumbled out of the chapel. He begged Eren to show him the rest of the memories that had been hidden from him, but he was met with silence. As Grisha talked about his future memories, we cut back to Eren's kiss at the medal ceremony. the moment when he saw Grisha's memories of the future. Grisha then went on to say that he had seen what was next, and it had terrified him. But later, when Eren spoke of this same memory, his reaction was clearly very different. This memory was, of course, the scenery of Eren's freedom, the rumbling. Grisha was desperate to prevent the future that he had seen, but even though he had seen that future, he still didn't know what was beyond it, nor whether his actions would lead to Eldia being saved. Grisha did not have memories beyond that scenery, so Eren could not have had them either. As a side note, these memories are also how Grisha was able to see and hear Eren inside of the race chapel. He had been sent Eren's future memories of Eren and Zeke exploring his own memories. That means that Grisha had been sent memories from Eren's point of view of he and Zeke's exploration. If you pay close attention, in every scene where Grisha is able to see Zeke, it is because Zeke is situated within Eren's field of view. Grisha is seeing memories from Eren's point of view in these moments. He's literally seeing himself in a third-person view. It must have been an extremely surreal, out-of-body experience for Grisha. Also, Eren's dialogue with Historia when he explained his plan to her does not make sense if he knew the full consequences of the rumbling at the time. I'll talk about that more, much later in the video. Regardless, if everything I've just said is true, then when did Eren learn he would be stopped? The answer to that question is after gaining control of the Founding Titan. Before we can talk about that though, first we have to talk more about Eren's future memories. We'll return to the subject of when Eren learned he would be stopped later in the video as well. What I want you to keep in mind for now is that Eren began the rumbling because he wanted to do it, without knowing he would be stopped in the end. So now that Eren knows the future, does it mean that future is the one that is guaranteed to happen? Yes, it does mean so, but not for the reasons you might think. In many series that involve time travel, the future cannot be changed once it has been predetermined because of supernatural entities or is an innate property of the universe. Take for example Steins Gate and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. In those series, once the future has been set, it cannot be changed barring some very specific circumstances. The universe of AOT also has a fixed future, but not for the same reason. Explaining why that is requires getting into a bit more philosophy, so please bear with me. The reason that the future is inevitable is not because it is fated by supernatural forces, but because it is a direct product of the past. There is only one timeline, and any changes that will be made to that timeline have already been reflected in the predetermined future. When one looks into the future, they are not seeing a single possible future, but rather the only possible future. To put it simply, the universe of AOT is a deterministic one. The philosophy of determinism claims that all events in the universe are determined by pre-existing causes, including moral choices. This means that there's a cause and effect relation between all events in the universe. It also means that human free will doesn't actually exist. The universe of AOT operates on this principle, and this also applies to Eren and his actions. As I talked about before, Eren is someone whose actions are controlled by his own inherent nature. By extension, the reason that the rumbling is inevitable is because it is a product of Eren's nature. Because Eren's nature was that of a person who wanted freedom, because the outside world's existence conflicted with that desire, and because he had the means to act on that desire, there was no possibility that Eren chose not to destroy the world. Eren's past and the circumstances of the world had ensured that this was the only possible future. Again, Eren is in no way compelled by supernatural forces like fate or destiny to take these actions. If Eren did not dream of freedom, and if he did not want to destroy the world, he would not have seen memories of the rumbling in the first place. But because of who Eren was, this had always been the one and only possible future. If that future were able to be changed, then he never would have seen it to begin with. Because there was only one timeline, the fact that he had seen this future meant that he would inevitably follow that timeline and take this path. But make no mistake, this is the future that would have happened, even if no one had witnessed it. Eren, or anyone else for that matter, could not get around the deterministic nature of the universe by simply not observing the future. In a deterministic universe, even if the future isn't seen, it does not mean that multiple outcomes are possible. No matter what, the future is created by the past, and there is only one future, even if no one knows what that future will be. Eren seeing the future did not lock that future into place, nor did Eren seeing it change that future. If someone in a deterministic universe sees the future and tries to change it, their failure to change that future is already set in stone. The fact that they witnessed it means that their future self also at the same point in time saw the future. It also means that if their future self tried to change it, they failed. Since there's only one timeline, and the future is a product of the past, their past self is determined to follow that same path of failure. Whether it's because they lack the means to change that future, or in Eren's case because they wanted that future, the future will not be changed. This is also why Grisha ultimately gave Eren the Attack Titan, despite asking Zeke to stop him. There's only one timeline, and it was the one in which Grisha was eaten by Eren. As a result, Grisha was guaranteed to follow that same path of giving his Titan to Eren. The reason why he chose to do so is heavily debated, but why he did so is irrelevant to the simple fact that he did. To reiterate, in Eren's case the future can't be changed because it is the future that Eren wants, and he can't help himself from wanting it. He cannot take steps to prevent that future, as he lacks the will to do so. Were Eren not someone with the innate desire to want that future, and without the means to make it happen, he would not have seen that future to begin with. The realization about the universe being deterministic has grave implications regarding the existence of free will. As we discussed, in a deterministic universe, only one future is possible. This means that any choices people make are predetermined, as the future cannot change. The decisions they make will be the ones that lead to the predetermined future. To an ordinary person who cannot see the future, it will still appear to themselves as if the choices they make can change the future. Since they don't know what future their choices will lead to, it will seem to them as if they have the free will to make whatever decisions they want, and that their choices can lead to many different outcomes. But that is not the case for someone who has witnessed the future. If someone witnesses the future in a deterministic universe, their illusion of free will is broken. But why? Let's use Eren as an example. Eren has witnessed the future that will be a result of his own choices. What he saw is what he will choose to do in the future. Had he not witnessed the future, it would have seemed to him as if he had free will in his decision whether or not to activate the rumbling. But now that he had seen the future, he knew what he would choose. Even if this is what he wanted, he became aware that he never had free will in what choice to make. This leads to a paradox related to free will known as Newcomb's paradox. More specifically, a subsection of Newcomb's paradox related to retrocausality. In a world with perfect predictors, people who have seen the future and can make predictions about it with 100% accuracy, retrocausality can occur. If a person truly knows the future and that knowledge affects their actions, then events in the future will be causing effects in the past. The chooser's choice will have already caused the predictor's action. Some have concluded that if perfect predictors can exist, there can be no free will and choosers will do whatever they're fated to do. Eren knows with 100% accuracy what choices he will make in the future. That is to say that Eren himself has become a perfect predictor. That raises the question, where did his idea to do the rumbling originate from? Did it originate from himself? Or did he only make that choice because seeing the future put the idea into his head? That is what lies at the heart of the perfect predictor paradox. Regardless, it is possible that perfect predictions can align with what the predictor actively desires. And in Eren's case, as someone who saw the future that he sought, that applies to him. For Eren, the origination of his choices is irrelevant. These are the decisions that he would have made, whether he had known he would make them or not. I'd like to share a quote from Twitter user LLuck, who I think summed this up perfectly. Eren knowing what he would do in the future doesn't end up mattering to him during his actions post-time skip. What he sees in the future is exactly what he would do even if he hadn't seen it, because this future is based on himself. He is pushed by himself and keeps moving forward because that future is what he wants and what he would do. He shows resolute determination to all of his actions because all the steps that he saw in front of himself are the ones that he would take. It was Eren who wanted this future to come into existence, and it was his will that brought it into existence. But ironically, as a result of knowing the future, his illusion of freedom to deviate from that future was taken away. He became acutely aware that all of his choices had been made before he had ever made them. Eren knew that what he was doing and what he wanted was wrong. He tried to see if the future could change. There was no supernatural force stopping him from telling other people about what he had seen and asking his friends to help him prevent that future. But of course, because the future he saw was the one he wanted deep down, he could not muster up the will to change it, nor could he take steps to change it. In truth, even Eren's doubt, guilt, and meager attempts to change the future were all predetermined. Because of the very nature of the universe and the circumstances of the world, their future could have never been anything else in the first place. And this inevitability, this realization of the predetermination of his own actions, and the lack of his own freedom on every level, is what led to Eren's change in demeanor and jaded attitude. To summarize, the future memories are a philosophical commentary on the nature of free will. As some people mistakenly assumed, this does not mean that the universe of AOT is controlled by some higher power, destiny, or fate. Rather, the future is created by the past, and the universe is deterministic. Were Eren not someone who sought freedom, he would not be compelled by supernatural forces to activate the rumbling. Eren destroyed the world because he wanted to do so, as it was in his nature. But as I talked about earlier, I don't believe that Isayama is saying that the deterministic nature of the universe absolves Eren of his crimes. Just as we cannot absolve a murderer who kills on impulse, we cannot excuse the actions that Eren took. In this way, I believe that the universe of AOT operates on the theory of compatibilism, the belief that we are still responsible for the actions we take, even though we lack true free will. And now that we have a full understanding of Eren's meaning of freedom, his state of mind, and his future memories, we can finally talk about the conclusion of his character arc. As Eren walked through the streets of Marley, he thought about how in the near future he would kill all of the people living there. He reasoned that if either Eldia or the world had to die, it made more sense for it to be Eldia going by numbers alone. But he was unwilling to make that sacrifice. He saw a child named Ramsey being attacked, and realized he'd seen him before through his dad's memories. His first instinct was to intervene and help, but he stopped. He knew that soon he would be the one to kill Ramsey. Saving him now would be pointless. But once again, he couldn't fight his own nature. Eren wasn't the kind of person who could ignore a child being attacked. Afterwards, he was reminded of the contradiction of Reiner's behavior. How Reiner went out of his way to save his friends on the island, while knowing he would later kill them. Eren had now done the same thing. No, what he was going to do was even worse than what Reiner had ever done. He realized then that he was the ultimate hypocrite for judging Reiner. Knowing what he would do in the future, and overcome with the immense guilt towards his own desire, he started crying. Ramsey couldn't understand the Eldian language, so this was the one time Eren could be honest to someone about his true intentions without reprisal.
The island. It's to save Eldia. But it's more than that. What was really beyond the walls was nothing like the world I dreamed of. It wasn't like the world I saw in Armin's book. When I learned that humanity lived beyond the walls, I was so disappointed. I wished for it. I wanted to wipe it all away. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Eren reflected one more time on Armin's book as he slaughtered the children running away from the destruction.
Ever since I was born, there before my eyes stood those miserable walls. Flaming water, frozen earth, plains of sand. I'm sure that the outside world is way bigger than the one inside the walls. Anyone who saw those things would be the freest person in the world.
By killing Ramsey, Eren finally reached the sight he had seen in his father's memories. The very manifestation of the freedom that he wanted. Ramsey was the physical embodiment of the innocent dream of freedom that Armin had. What Ramsey sought was pure freedom, and Eren had murdered him to achieve his own corrupted version of that same freedom. It was the ultimate sin for Eren, and the betrayal of the dream Armin had once shared with him.
This is freedom. Finally. We're here at last. This is that sight. Right, Armin?
Having experienced his childhood dream, Eren brought Armin into pass to share his excitement. But of course, this had never been Armin's dream, and never what he wanted. Their dreams had diverged a long, long time ago. Together in paths, Eren and Armin finally explored the world they had heard so much about. Just as at the beach, and again after meeting the volunteers and traveling to the outside world himself, Armin was amazed by what he saw. But Eren had always longed for a different scenery than this, and he had already seen it with his own eyes. Eren had long ago given up on finding the freedom he wanted in the world as it was, but Armin had not. And that was at the core of what separated them, and what drove them apart. Eren, unable to accept the world, had become a slave to his dream. But Armin would continue to seek a way to accept the world that they lived in.
Somewhere in my head, there was a promise I made to Eren that we'd travel the world of the unknown. I thought it would come true. No. It wasn't the world we dreamed of. But I still want to believe that there's still a world we don't know about yet out there. Past the walls.
From the moment he kissed Historia's hand, Eren knew that he would activate the rumbling, and as a result reach freedom. Just like we talked about previously, he didn't yet know anything beyond that. Keeping that in mind, prior to activating the rumbling, there were two goals that Eren worked towards. Let's go over those goals now. Like I talked about before, his first goal was to experience freedom. For Eren, experiencing freedom meant that the outside world needed to be wiped clean. We've already talked about that extensively, so I don't think it needs any more elaboration. His second goal was to give his friends long lives, which required protecting the island. Eren wanted to protect his friends from the outside world, and to do so knew that he needed to protect their home. Eren knew that a full worldwide rumbling wasn't necessary for that goal. There were other options. But it's also true that he wanted to protect them, including protecting Historia from the cycle of cannibalism. Destroying the outside world was the most sure way to save the people he cared about, and Eren was not willing to take any risks. His actions were motivated not with just himself in mind, but also the people he cared about. Even if it gave him a convenient excuse to do what he wanted, he still wanted to protect them. But Eren's interest in protecting the island began and ended there. Eren never cared about LD itself, or the new Eldian Empire, so long as his friends were safe. Regardless, Eren began the rumbling with only these two goals in mind, and the rumbling was a sure way to accomplish both of them at once. So then why did he allow himself to be defeated in the end? The answer to that is that somewhere along the line, he saw the future once again. The question we need to answer now is this: when exactly did Eren see the future again and learn that he would be stopped? And we can pinpoint that exact moment. Eren's plans were stopped long before the Alliance ever got near him. In a deterministic universe, the events of the past create the one and only possible future. And with the founding Titan's power over space and time, Eren now began to experience both sides of that cause and effect simultaneously. The past, present, and future lost all distinction. From Eren's perspective, the events of the past happened concurrently with the events of the future. And because of that, Eren was once again able to see the future, this time without being limited to what was in his dad's memories. There were two relevant pieces of information that Eren learned from this that would alter his plans. He learned that the alliance created by his friends would kill him after he destroyed 4/5 of the outside world. He also learned that Mikasa would make a choice that would end the curse of the Titans. Just as Eren's choice to initiate the rumbling was an inevitability in the future he had seen, Eren's failure to complete the rumbling was also an inevitability in that same future. He couldn't even intervene and try to prevent them from reaching him in the first place, because Eren had seen them reach him and therefore knew it would happen. Finishing the rumbling would require killing his friends, a sacrifice he could never make. But as with everything else, Eren never had a choice in the matter to begin with. Because of his imminent, unavoidable death, Eren altered his plans and gained two new objectives. His first new objective was to end the curse of the Titans. He didn't know the specifics, but he knew that his actions would push Mikasa into making a choice that would eliminate Titans from the world. His second new objective was to make his friends into heroes. Now that he knew the outside world wouldn't be wiped away, his final goal was to prop his friends up as the heroes who had defeated him. That would let them pave the way for peace between the island and the survivors of the outside world. Part of that included making the biggest show of his defeat as possible. The first step in this plan was to announce to the world that he intended to destroy everything outside of the island. While that was his true intent at the beginning, From the moment he gained full control of the Founding Titan, he knew it was an impossible goal. That's also why he turned into a Titan and began fighting Armin hand to hand at the very end. It was important that everyone there witnessed him being defeated by the Alliance. Though he had the ability to easily take them away, Eren intentionally left the Alliance with their Titan powers. All of that was to ensure that they wouldn't hesitate to kill him, and that they would have the means to do so. Just as Eren had known he would be, he was successful in everything he set out to do. Although he was never able to complete the rumbling as he originally intended, he still experienced the freedom he sought after for a brief moment, and saved his friends. So long as it meant killing his friends, Eren could not complete the rumbling, because the one and only thing he valued as much as his own freedom was their lives. From Eren's perspective, it must have been unfortunate that they came to stop him. The ideal situation for Eren would have been if his friends had joined the Jaegers or refused to come after him. Unfortunately for him, however, they did. And because of his unwillingness to kill them, his defeat was assured. But if Eren didn't know he would be stopped, or if the Alliance hadn't pursued him, he would have completed the rumbling. He began the rumbling with every intention of destroying the entire world.
Did you really need to go this far? Was this all for our sake?
Eren looked at him but didn't respond and walked away, changing the subject.
Even if I didn't know that you'd stop me in the end, I think I still would have flattened this world. I would have leveled every forest, and I would have left the land covered in carrion-fattened insects a few days later. I wanted to leave every surface a blank plain. Why?
Eren thought back to his father's first words to him. From the day he was born, he was free. But even Eren didn't understand why his own nature was that way, nor exactly what it was that drove him onward. I want to share another quote from Luck, who I think described this best. Does he want to proceed with the rumbling? Was that an idea that was put into him first by the future he saw? But isn't this future something his own persona created? Did he forge the future, or was the future the one who forged his rage? Both? It doesn't matter. He doesn't know.
I don't know why, but I wanted to do that. I had to.
There's a common misconception that Eren was just acting throughout much of the story. This misconception mostly stems from people misunderstanding Eren's goals and how much he knew about the future. Eren's reluctance to be truthful to Armin about his reasoning, even in paths, only exacerbated the problem. Just to make sure everyone understands, I want to go over each one of Eren's supposed lies. Eren does lie at points, but the points at which he does are fairly obvious in retrospect, especially after understanding everything else I've talked about so far. So what did Eren lie about, and what was he truthful about? Eren lied to Yelena and Zeke about supporting their euthanasia plan. I don't think anyone is in disagreement that Eren never supported their plan, as it contradicts his core beliefs. It should also be obvious why Eren lied to them. He needed them to believe that he was on their side in order to meet with Zeke and use the Founding Titan. Did Eren actually lie to Floch? Not exactly. At the time he communicated his plan to Floch, Eren genuinely intended on destroying the entire world. Once again, in contrary to popular belief, Eren did not yet know he would lose in the end when he began working with Floch. It's easy to forget because of where this chapter is placed in the story, but this event takes place before Eren went to Marley. That means it's also before he learned the lesson of,
海の外も壁の中も同じなんだ。
At the time he talked to Floch, Eren still viewed the people of the outside world as his enemies. What he said to Floch was genuine. But did Eren ever actually agree with Floch's ideology? In short, no. Floch and the Jaegerists wanted Eldia to become the world's dominant power. They executed dissidents and forced others to work for them to establish the new Eldian Empire. But Eren never cared about any of that, and never cared about Eldia as a nation. He prioritized his loved one's safety over Eldia's future multiple times. Saving the island specifically, or Eldia itself, was never the reason why he did what he did. And Eren deliberately excluded from Floch the fact that his primary goal was his own freedom and not to help Eldia. Unlike Floch, Eren came to understand that killing the people of the outside world couldn't be justified, but he still did it regardless for his own reasons. In that way, their objectives only happened to align. In the end, Eren worked to set up those that opposed Floch and the Jaegerists as the heroes of humanity. Did Eren lie to Historia? Once again, no. At the time, just like with Floch, Eren genuinely believed what he was telling her, as he hadn't been to Marley yet. I mentioned this earlier, but what Eren said to Historia didn't make sense if he already knew everything about the future. There was no advantage to lying to her if he already knew everything. If Eren knew that the rumbling would result in the end of the Titan Curse, there was no reason for him not to explain that to her, as it would make her more willing to cooperate with him. The closest he came to lying to her was when he omitted his primary goal, just like he did with Floch. Eren had told her that their conflict would never end until one side was wiped out, and he believed it at the time. However, in the end, he would trust Armin to find a way for the survivors of humanity to make peace. Eren lied to Mikasa, Armin, and his other friends. His goal was to drive them as far away from him as possible. But an important distinction to make here is when he started to lie to them. He only did so after he realized that it was wrong to kill the people of the outside world. Prior to going to Marley, Eren did not lie to them outright, but rather omitted what he knew about the future, just like he had done with Floch and Historia. After living in Marley, Eren knew that what he was planning on doing was unforgivable. He knew that his friends wouldn't be able to live with themselves if they were to help him, and so he began to distance himself from them. His cold demeanor and lies towards them only began after he returned to the island. That demeanor was not a result of his hatred towards them, but rather his own self-loathing. For that same reason, Eren was reluctant to tell Armin his true desires at first, even in paths. Eren was deeply ashamed of what he wanted and what he had done. It would take time and questioning from Armin before he finally told the entire truth. But let's back up. Was what Eren said to them at the table scene a lie? I do think that part of what he said during the scene, especially to Armin, was genuine. It probably felt to an extent like Armin had betrayed him by getting so attached to Annie. And despite his own desire to do the rumbling, Armin's lack of solutions to their current situation likely frustrated him. As someone who knew the future, it probably appeared to him as if everyone around him was doing nothing at all to prevent that future. As he admitted later, he got too into the act when he fought Armin. In the end, Armin was the only person who Eren was direct and honest to about why he did what he did. While he had told Ramsay and he had given Reiner hints, Armin was the first time he laid it all out on the table directly. Eren had complete trust and faith in Armin, and Armin was the only one he would share his darkest sin with. Eren's ultimate lie was the claim that he hated Mikasa. Nothing could be further from the truth. He loved Mikasa and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. But the very nature of their relationship was something that Eren could not accept. She lived for him because he had been there for her when she had nothing else. But what Eren was going to do was not something he could allow Mikasa to be there for. He decided she would never be able to find her own happiness, so long as she continued to depend on him, and if he allowed her to stay by his side through what was coming. After his breakdown in front of Ramsay, Eren approached Mikasa one last time. It was at this point, after confessing to Ramsay, that he must have known he could no longer be with her. This would be their last conversation before Eren left her. Eren asked what he was to her, and she responded to him that they were family. But in the end, we saw a world in which Mikasa answered Eren's question differently. Eren showed Mikasa an alternate reality, one in which they abandoned everything to spend their remaining time together. But a world like this could never exist. This was a world founded on a time paradox, one in which the island ended up being destroyed because of Eren's inaction. This world contradicted Eren's very nature. It was never possible to begin with. Everyone had to be drunk on something to keep moving forward. And this was, in the end, true for Eren as well. Eren was drunk on freedom, and he'd come to understand just how that desire had enslaved him. But he could not stop himself. Forced onwards by his own nature and his dream, and losing himself in the process, in the end Eren was literally a puppet to his own desire for freedom. And he didn't want Mikasa to sacrifice her own freedom for him as well.
Please, Mikasa. Forget about me.
But despite the terrible things he had done, Eren had still been the one who had saved her on that day. She still loved him, but she knew that he could not stop himself, and that she had to be the one to do it. But even so, she decided that she wouldn't forget about him. And with that resolution, Mikasa took Eren's life. But Eren was wrong about one thing. Even after his death, Mikasa still chose to remember him and his kindness towards her. Even so, she started her own life and found her own freedom. Eren did not start out as a popular protagonist. In fact, prior to very recently, if you were to check any discussion about annoying protagonists, you would almost always find Eren there. The overall perception of Eren was that he was annoying and stupid, and it stayed that way for years. When the time skip happened, public perception of Eren began to shift drastically. His popularity exploded, and for obvious reasons. The new Eren was cool, ruthless, and had seemingly evolved past all the traits that he'd been disliked for in the past. He had turned from a character who was very reactive, constantly being pushed around by the story, to one who was proactive and seemed to pull the story along. The explosion in his popularity made sense given how his character changed. But therein lies the problem. Eren had not changed, he'd only seemed to change. And because of that, a lot of people got the wrong idea about who Eren was and what his role in the narrative was. Eren was a very childish character. His reason for doing the rumbling was, too, a childish one. He didn't think it was justified, but he did it anyways. He was not a stoic anti-hero, forced to become a monster for what he thought was right. Rather, he was a child who refused to grow up, lashing out after his expectations weren't met, and disregarding the innocent people who he had to trample on to get what he wanted. Eren's goal of freedom was not a noble one in any capacity. He would have destroyed the world whether or not he knew he would have been stopped in the end. The rumbling might have had positive consequences as a byproduct, but those were not the reasons why Eren did what he did, and there were alternate solutions to protecting his friends was his only concern. Regardless of how pressured he felt, what Eren sought was evil, and he caused an immeasurable amount of death and destruction for his own sake. It's hard to accept the truth about Eren, especially when you become attached to him, watched him grow up, and in many people's cases followed his story for years. We wanted to justify what he was doing, to say that he was doing it because he had no other choice. Even after his confession to Ramsay, which directly spelled it out for us, we still refused to listen. But the ending made it clear. Many of us had become attached to a version of Eren that didn't exist. And this misunderstanding is what led to the controversy of the ending's most infamous moment, in which Eren broke down and began crying about his inability to be with Mikasa. Isayama once said that when he wrote this line he thought, "Eren is back." And Isayama was right to say that, because this line was the most that Eren had been himself since he saw the future 4 years prior. This was the real Eren, and this is who his true self had always been. But more than anything, I think that this line was directed specifically at people who had forgotten who Eren was. When Armin called Eren pathetic, I believe that he was speaking for the audience. Like Armin, we'd also gotten used to Eren's new demeanor. But this was a harsh reminder that the true motivations behind Eren's actions were childish and pathetic, and not to be admired. Eren had given up on his life with Mikasa, and with everyone else, in favor of his freedom. The fact that he was complaining about it now was, in itself, kind of pathetic. At the same time, I think it's wrong not to view Eren as an incredibly tragic character. Despite his actions, in the end he suffered greatly, and he hated himself for what he had done. He knew that he could not be forgiven, and he accepted paying the price for those actions. Eren had sought freedom for so long, but in the end he was probably the least free he could be. Eren lived only to the age of 19 and experienced a life full of trauma and hardships. He had the right to express his dying regrets to his best friend. He wasn't a good person by any means, though we can still empathize with him. Regardless, if you dislike this scene because it makes Eren seem pathetic, you dislike it for the correct reason. Eren is, in fact, supposed to be seen as childish and pathetic. Make no mistake, this moment is absolutely intended to be seen as the childish whining of someone who never grew up, and Isayama succeeded in portraying that. Given everything else we know about Eren, it is in no way out of character. With how cool Eren had been made to look up to this point, I think that this harsh teardown of people's misreading of him was completely intentional, and intended to be jarring to those who'd become attached to the false image of Eren. There's a running theme in the story pre-time skip of Eren having his freedom restricted. He gets kidnapped in almost every arc. His tendency to be dragged around at the story's whims was a big factor in what led to many people's hate towards him. I said before that after the time skip, he had seemingly changed to a character who pulled the story along to reach his goals. But just as with Eren's new personality, that was also a surface-level misconception. While Eren was no longer physically restricted, the story itself was now in control of him. I already talked at length about his lack of free will, and that lack of autonomy was made explicitly clear with the last plot twist of the story, the reveal of what actually happened to his mom on that day 9 years ago.
That day, that time, it wasn't Bertholdt's time to die yet. What? The one who let him go and made her go that way was...
As Bertholdt was about to be eaten by Dinah, Eren intervened using the power of the Founder and made her overlook him. As an unintended consequence, however, his own mom was the one eaten instead. There is only one timeline, and the past creates the future. With the Founding Titan's ability, Eren now experienced both past and future simultaneously. This sequence of events was how things had always happened, and they couldn't have happened any other way. Even knowing the result of his actions, even at the cost of his mother's life, Eren would still make this choice. Without it, and with Bertholdt's death, Eren would have never been able to reach the freedom that he wanted. I've seen a lot of people call this reveal pointless or excessive, but I think it's necessary in the way that it shows the true nature of their universe, as well as Eren's true lack of freedom. Even with all the power in the world, he could do nothing to change what had started everything. He was ultimately even more powerless than he was on the day that he watched her get eaten alive in front of his eyes. Up to his very last moments, Eren was never free. Even if he had accomplished his goal and destroyed the entire world, I think he still wouldn't really have attained the freedom he sought after. At first he would be at peace, but then what? Once he destroyed the world, what would come after? Just as Eren was bored with the world before finding out about his own lack of freedom, and as he was bored living in the free world of school casts, I think that Eren would have not been able to stand the empty, meaningless world outside of the walls before too long. He would be searching for some nebulous feeling until the day he died, never satisfied, always aimlessly pursuing something he could never attain. Eren is not a good person, but he is a fantastic antagonist and villain. Of course, whether you like him or not is going to be completely subjective, but I think there's no doubt that Eren is someone who embodied, and then later opposed, the themes of the story in every meaningful way. As the protagonist, Eren was a vessel for the readers to explore the themes being presented, but Eren later chose to reject those same themes, and in the process became the embodiment of what the story opposed. Someone who refused to accept the world, and who refused to accept his enemies. Not because he didn't learn anything, or that he didn't grow over the course of his journey. He did, but he willingly rejected that growth. And that subversion of what was being explored is part of what makes Eren so brilliant and the ideal antagonist of the series. He is someone who became the villain of his own story. It took an incredible amount of planning and work to successfully pull off such a character arc. The hints about what he would eventually become were there the entire time, but like with almost every other development in the series, we couldn't really appreciate them until we looked back. It also took an incredible amount of faith in his readers for Isayama to have the confidence to pull off such a bold and extreme narrative choice. It would have been much easier and likely much less controversial had he chosen a less risky direction for the arc of his main character. But with the benefit of hindsight, and now with our full understanding of all of Eren's actions, I think it's unreasonable to think that Eren's conclusion could have been anything else. Anyone who believes that this development was not planned for a long time is simply incorrect. Even over the course of writing this, my understanding of Eren has once again evolved. Significant parts of this script had to be rewritten again and again as I dug deeper into his character. I continued to discover aspects of Eren I hadn't understood when I began writing. I feel like I've come to understand Eren much better by picking him apart, and I think that's a testament to the quality of the writing. Attack on Titan as a whole is a story full of massive narrative risk-taking with incredibly rewarding payoffs. Just like how the basement reveal was initially met with backlash and skepticism, or fears that the series had jumped the shark, it was appreciated more as time went on. These days, the basement reveal is widely held in high regard. Because of how little information we had about him for years, there was a joke within the AOT community that Eren himself was the new basement. The more I've dug into Eren, the more I'm beginning to feel that assessment was spot on, both in how the mystery was presented and in how people would perceive that mystery once it was fully understood. While the philosophical aspects of his character might seem confusing at first, I hope that this video has helped you understand him better. I believe that there is an incredibly fascinating question about the nature of free will that is raised by Eren's story. My hope is that just as with the basement reveal, Eren's character will continue to be discussed and eventually recognized for the fantastic, deeply philosophical exploration of freedom that it is. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Making this video took an insane amount of time, so I hope you found it insightful. If you made it all the way to the end of this, consider leaving a like and a comment with your feedback. I'd be interested to hear if I managed to change anyone's opinion, even a little bit. When I started making this video, it was supposed to be about 30 minutes long. It was only going to take me a couple of weeks. In the end, it took me several months. But I'm pretty satisfied with how it turned out, so I think it was worth it. I'd like to be able to keep putting time into making videos like this. This is my first video in a long time, but from now on I'm going to be posting pretty frequently. I also want to thank Electric Mercury, who did the voice acting you heard during the video. I linked his channel in the description, so go check it out. If you're here without seeing my older videos, they're linked on the screen now. Thanks again for watching.